Secures 20 million new doses of the Pfizer vaccine after it was made the preferred option for Australians under 50.
It is anticipated that these additional 20 million doses will be available in Q4 of this year.
A driver who killed 4 children in Sydney's West sentenced to 28 years in prison. US President Joe Biden attempts to use the power of his office to end the deadlock on American gun control. And Northern Ireland sees some of its worst political violence in years, with a week of clashes on the streets of Belfast. Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Karina Carvalho. Australia has ordered an extra 20 million doses of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine as the federal government overhauls its COVID-19 vaccination plans. The Pfizer vaccine is now preferred for people under the age of 50 because of concerns about possible links between the AstraZeneca shot and rare blood clots. Political reporter Jade McMillan joins me now from Canberra. Jade, take us through the detail of this announcement.
Well, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says that agreement was reached overnight to order another 20 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine for Australia. This doubles the number of doses that Australia is now expected to receive this year, takes it from 20 million to a total of 40 million. Only 1 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine have arrived here so far, though. The Prime Minister insists that by the end of the year, all of those 40 million doses will have arrived. This is a major development in light of the announcement last night that Australian medical authorities are now advising that people under the age of 50 receive the Pfizer vaccine rather than the AstraZeneca one because of concerns about a possible link between the AstraZeneca vaccine and a rare blood clotting condition. The Prime Minister stressed today that there is no ban on Australians under the age of 50 getting the AstraZeneca vaccine, that it's a personal choice and they are free to get it if they wish to do so. But nonetheless, that announcement last night has had a major impact on Australia's vaccination program. The AstraZeneca vaccine was supposed to be the one that most Australians were offered. It's the only one that is being produced domestically. And so this announcement about an extra 20 million Pfizer doses on order is crucial.
The Australian government has secured overnight an additional 20 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine in line with the advice of the Scientific Industry Technical Advisory Group on vaccines led by Professor Brendan Murphy. Now, through our advanced purchase agreement with Pfizer, these additional 20 million Pfizer doses means that Australia will now receive a total of 40 million Pfizer doses in 2021. It is anticipated that these additional 20 million doses will be available in Q4 of this year. That's our current instruction, and we'll obviously be doing everything we can to seek to move that forward where we can. But that is very welcome news, particularly in the light of the information that we received from ATAGI last night.
Now, the government had been hoping that all Australians would be offered their first COVID vaccine dose by the end of October. The Prime Minister won't say how that timeline is now going to be shifted. But as you heard him outline there, these 20 million extra doses aren't expected to arrive in Australia until the last 3 months of this year. And so that gives you an idea of how long some people will be waiting for their vaccine.
Jade, National Cabinet also discussed a further easing of coronavirus restrictions.
Yeah, that's right. The changes to the vaccination program were at the top of the agenda for the Prime Minister and state and territory leaders today, but they also discussed COVID restrictions and what the Prime Minister said was a move towards more consistency across the country. He says that the states and territories have agreed to advice that restrictions on venues will be no stricter than the 2 square metre rule, and also that large ticketed seated gatherings can have 100% 95% capacity. He says that the states and territories have also agreed to aim for responses to local outbreaks that will keep domestic borders open. At the same time, the Prime Minister says that leaders have agreed to ask for more advice from the expert medical panel on how and when Australia might be able to open up to other parts of the world. The Trans-Tasman travel bubble is due to get underway later this month, meaning that Australians can travel to New Zealand without having to go into hotel quarantine, and the Prime Minister has nominated Singapore as a potential next step. But there is still a lot more work to be done. The Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, ran through some of the factors that experts will be looking at when they're weighing those options up.
The transmission of the virus, what is the effect of the vaccine on that? There's positive signs that it does affect, but that isn't completely known. The variants of concern, we know that some of the vaccines do not work as well against some of the variants of concern, and there's more variants coming every day. So there's another element. The length of protection of the vaccines themselves, that's an unknown. No one in the world has had a vaccine in their arm for more than a year. And so that is another factor we need to put in. So there's a range of issues we'll be putting into some modelling over the coming weeks, and we'll be discussing that as part of it. But I think it's important to not rush this component. At the moment, Australia is mostly open internally, and that is the agreement, as the PM has mentioned, about the response to outbreaks that will come from incursions from quarantine. That's the situation at the moment, whilst that vaccine rolls out to protect our most vulnerable people. That's the crucial point.
Now, Scott Morrison says that work will also involve looking at alternatives to hotel quarantine. The Prime Minister says Australia isn't yet ready to move away from that system, but he does want the experts to look at how and when we might be able to consider home quarantine instead, or indeed no quarantine for people who've had a COVID-19 vaccination that has also been approved by Australian authorities. Jade McMillan reporting from Canberra.
For more on the vaccine rollout, I'm joined by Professor Tony Cunningham from the Centre for Virus Research at the University of Sydney. Professor Cunningham, thank you for your time tonight. How welcome are the extra 20 million Pfizer doses the Prime Minister announced today?
I think that's wonderful, given the uncertainty of the recommendations for people under the age of 50. That gives us 40 million doses, 20 million people, and that's probably enough to cover most of our most vulnerable and our frontline workers, with perhaps give and take. And of course, we can still use AstraZeneca above the age of 50, and people under the age of 50, some of them may choose to still have AstraZeneca because the side effect, if proven, is so rare.
Yeah, was the change in advice last night for the AstraZeneca vaccine for those under 50 to begin given Pfizer instead warranted, in your view?
I think that we are consistent with the other regulatory agencies around the world, particularly the European Medicines Agency and the UK agency as well. And so it's consistent. I think one of the things that's influenced people, although this is a rare side effect, it does have a 25% mortality rate, and it gives us pause and time to work out a lot more about this side effect. Firstly, to really pin it down and show whether or not it is associated with the vaccine, certainly looks at who are the most vulnerable people, to develop a diagnostic test if we could narrow down the people at risk, and then apply diagnostic tests in some way to them. We could, as we do in certain other conditions, advise them not to have the vaccine, and you would have a smaller group of people excluded. That's certainly one way to go about it.
What's it done to confidence in the AstraZeneca vaccine? You point out the 25% mortality rate, but we've got to point out that the AstraZeneca vaccine on the whole is very safe. We're talking about a 1 in 250,000 chance risk of a rare blood clot. So could the change in advice lead to more vaccine hesitancy?
Well, I certainly hope not. We have to remember that there are risks of anaphylaxis, of fainting after Pfizer and Moderna, and that's been very well handled. You know, observing people for half an hour, having an EpiPen injection on hand, and that's about the same incidence. And we also see other medications that have thrombotic complications, as the Prime Minister outlined. But this is very rare, and in fact, although we say 1 in 250,000, in some populations it's probably even rarer. We need to know more, and I think we will know more in the next few months. There'll be some pretty vigorous epidemiologic studies ongoing.
Could Australia receive these extra Pfizer doses before the end of the year, especially if the United States finishes its rollout early?
Well, that's certainly the hope, and I heard Dr. Swan talk about this, and I think he's right. I think there is an opportunity for us to get more doses once the USA is finished. There'll be, of course, other countries vying for those supplies. And I think we'll just have to wait and see. And Pfizer have done pretty well in satisfying demand, so hopefully there'll be no restrictions on the export of these vaccines the way we've seen with AstraZeneca. I should just comment on what you said about concern about the public concern about vaccines. There's never been greater scrutiny about vaccine trials and vaccine rollouts with COVID vaccines. We've often seen hiccups with other vaccines, but they go unnoticed, and our vaccines then are rolled out quite successfully. It's really important to reassure the public just how well our regulatory agencies are protecting us, checking every batch, and the companies themselves. 70% of AstraZeneca's time and other companies' time is spent on quality control of their vaccines. So safety is paramount, and I think we've seen that. We're a bit lucky in Australia. There's a bit of a delay in our rollout, so we can watch what happens in the rest of the world as well.
Let's talk logistics. Pfizer is an mRNA vaccine which requires extreme cold storage at minus 70 degrees. Are GPs equipped to administer this vaccine, or will we have to change the mode of the rollout? I know the New South Wales government said today that it will continue with plans for a mass vaccination hub in Sydney's west.
Yes, we need storage of the Pfizer vaccine at ultra-low temperatures. It can then be conveyed in dry ice to appropriate places, as we've done with the aged care facilities. And we may need to see perhaps some of that, as well as obviously we'd need that ultra-low temperature storage in mass vaccination facilities. We may have to look at other vaccines, Novavax or perhaps others, coming later in the year for rural and remote, or there may be other logistic ways in which we can perhaps establish centres for low temperature storage.
Okay, Tony Cunningham, always good to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Corinne.
Western Australia has stopped all AstraZeneca vaccinations for those aged under 50. The Premier Mark McGowan says the decision follows the change in health advice last night.
Those in WA aged under 50 who had AstraZeneca vaccine appointments booked today have had their appointments cancelled. All of these individuals will now be contacted by health authorities to discuss their options following this latest advice. People who have had their first dose of AstraZeneca of any age without any serious side effects can be given their second dose, including those under 50. It is important to remember the side effect is extremely rare. Our health experts have reinforced that the benefits of the COVID vaccine for those aged 50 and over far outweigh very rare complications that have been reported around the world.
For more, don't miss the vaccine tonight on ABC News and anytime on iView. Host Jeremy Fernandez takes a look at what's next for AstraZeneca in Australia, as well as the possibility of expanding the vaccine portfolio to include other manufacturers. That's 7:45 Eastern Standard Time on the ABC News channel tonight and every Friday night. A drunk and drug driver who killed 4 children in a crash at Oatlands in Sydney's West has been sentenced to 28 years in prison. Reporter Kathleen Ferguson has more from outside court.
Samuel William Davidson wiped away tears as Judge James Bennett detailed the injuries of siblings Anthony, Angelina and Sienna Abdullah and their cousin Veronique Saka, all aged under 13 when they were killed by Davidson's car, who ploughed into them at Oatlands in February last year. They had been on their way to get ice creams at the time. Judge Bennett told the court that Davidson had been drinking for more than 12 hours and had taken drugs before he got behind the wheel. He said that he accepted that Davidson was remorseful and had a low risk of reoffending, but he said that no sentence he handed down was going to ease the pain of the families. Speaking outside the court, the families of the victims said that they were never seeking revenge and that they felt that justice had been served. But they said that this sentence didn't ease their pain, but that they hoped that it did serve as a lesson about the consequences of drugs and alcohol.
We will all have our hearts broken till the day we take our last breath, and no sentence can help ease that pain. The justice system isn't a place to serve as revenge for the victims. It is there to show the community the consequences of breaking the law.
We hope people will learn from what happened with us, that drink, driving, speeding and drugs can kill someone on the road. And I hope they'll learn from what happened with us and they will try and avoid it and we can save lives, because no parents deserve to go through what we just have been through.
Davidson will be eligible for parole in 21 years.
Former school principal Malka Leifer has appeared in the Melbourne Magistrates Court for the second time since being extradited from Israel to face child sexual abuse charges. Reporter Zalika Rizmal has more from outside court.
Good afternoon. Well, former Melbourne school principal Malka Leifer has appeared for a second time in court since she was extradited from Israel back in January to face 74 child sexual abuse charges. Now, those charges, which include multiple counts of rape, relate to allegations that she allegedly abused 3 sisters during her time as headmistress of the Adass Israel School in Elsternwick between 2004 and 2008. Now, Ms Leifer has always strenuously denied those allegations and has maintained her innocence. Now, today we've had a brief administrative hearing here at Melbourne Magistrates Court, and the 54-year-old has appeared in court via video link from the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre. That's Victoria's maximum security women's prison, where she's been in remand since January. Now, Ms Leifer was wearing a blue jumper, a white headscarf, and she only spoke to respond to the magistrate and confirm that she could in fact hear the proceedings. And we also saw that she was supported by her brother, who also was there virtually watching those proceedings from Israel. Now, we learnt today that 10 witnesses will be called to give evidence against Ms Leifer when those allegations are tested later this year. Now, they include those 3 complainants, those sisters, Darcy Ehrlich, Nicole Mayer and Ali Sapper as well. We also learnt that the defence lawyers are considering cross-examining the alleged victims about their home life during the alleged abuse. The court was told that they are potentially looking at probing what was happening at home during that time, during the alleged abuse between 2004 and 2008. We know that there will be another administrative hearing in July, but when it comes to the more substantive stuff, the most significant thing is is the 5-day committal hearing, which will take place in the middle of September. Now, we know that there'll be those 10 witnesses there. We also know that that's when the charges will be tested and the magistrate will have to decide whether there is enough evidence for it then to proceed to trial.
Sydney Zoo has been closed temporarily after a chimpanzee was found dead in its enclosure. The zoo says the animal, named Mowgli, was found in the chimpanzee habitat this morning, and staff are in a state of deep shock and grief. It says reports the animal had escaped are false and an investigation is underway. Authorities in Western Australia are urging residents to be on alert as 2 weather systems merge over the Indian Ocean. Jessica Warriner reports from Perth.
We do actually have a second tropical cyclone in the area now. That's Tropical Cyclone Odette. Of course, we had Tropical Cyclone Saroja that formed earlier in the week. Odette is just northwest of that. And a blue alert has now been triggered for a huge swathe of the state's coast from Coral Bay down to Lancelin. That's a 1,000-kilometre span of the coast. It includes towns like Carnarvon, Geraldton, Kalbarri in there as well. The new tropical cyclone isn't as strong as Saroja, though. Odette is expected to weaken as those 2 systems meet. Saroja is the dominant area, the dominant tropical cyclone in that particular area. And at a press conference a short time ago, the Bureau of Meteorology was saying a little bit about what a rare event it is.
Tropical cyclone Saroja is quite an unusual event. Areas to the south of Carnarvon, it's quite rare for tropical cyclones to make an impact across those parts. This event is quite rare for areas along the upper west coast and through southwest WA.
So DFAS is advising that there could be major highway and road closures over the coming days. They are advising that the Northwest Coastal Highway could close heading south of Manilia. So that's a small town between Carnarvon and Coral Bay. Like I said before, there's a huge span of coastline affected between Coral Bay and Lancelin. That area could be expanded or reduced as time goes on. People need to secure their boats, caravans, sheds, anything that could be affected by these huge gusts of winds. And DFAS is warning anyone on holiday in the area to check in with their accommodation provider, see whether they're ready to weather that storm, as the case may be. And anyone who is planning to stay in the area needs to know that they're at risk, which is something that DFAS was reiterating today.
We're just advising the community that they're putting themselves at risk if they stay in the area, given to the conditions that are going to be prevalent over the weekend and leading into Monday. We're asking also residents in the local area to make sure that they put in their own plan, they're cleaning up their properties and ensuring any loose objects are secured.
So Tropical Cyclone Saroja is expected to hit the coast between Sunday and Monday. Obviously, there'll be huge gusts of winds in excess of 125 kilometres an hour. The Bureau of Meteorology has suggested there will be heavy rainfall and flash flooding, and it's currently a Category 1 but is expected to go up to Category 2 or 3. And of course, emergency services are warning people that they need to stay on top of the current information in regards to this. Things are changing rapidly, and we are expecting fresh information to come out at 9 o'clock local time tonight.
The US president is using the power of the White House to try to break through America's deadlock on gun control. Joe Biden announced steps to crack down on homemade firearms that have no serial number and can be bought without a background check. He says more action is needed to combat the epidemic of gun violence. From Washington, Greg Jennett reports.
DIY's never been as deadly.
So this is a ghost gun.
Ghost guns are the flat pack of America's amateur arms race, coming in kits.
When complete, there's no serial number identifying them, nor is there any government registration of them ever existing.
They can't be traced, and their owners never checked for suitability either.
Today, with online sales and ghost guns, times and trafficking methods have changed, and we have to adjust.
Joe Biden's got them in his sights to be registered like every other federally regulated rifle and more.
But man, you talk about some freedom.
Elaborate, extended pistols of the kind used to kill 10 people in Boulder last month would also be treated as the rifles they effectively are.
So far this year, guns have taken the lives of an estimated 11,000 of our neighbours, friends, and fellow Americans.
The president's determined, holding out model laws for the states so gun owners considered dangerous can be red flagged, and a court order sought to strip them of their weapons before they cause any harm.
Gun violence in this country is an epidemic, and it's an international embarrassment.
Joe Biden's delivered on an election commitment, but he's also stretching the limits of what he alone can do. The big, sweeping federal law changes that so many have demanded for so long are for Congress to decide. And there's still no consensus there.
We're geared up for a rather large, long fight here for the next, 3.5 years or so under this Biden administration.
Even against a weakened gun lobby, the obstacles to banning assault rifles or stripping gun makers of their legal shield against being sued for killings remain almost insurmountable.
Real people on both sides of the aisle want action. So all that is left is the will and the courage to act.
So the president moves with haste, hoping that others might follow. Greg Jennett, ABC News, Washington.
3 medical experts have told a US court George Floyd died of a lack of oxygen when he was pinned to the ground by a Minneapolis police officer in May last year. A lung and critical care specialist testified at the trial of Derek Chauvin, who faces charges of murder and manslaughter. Dr. Martin Tobin says Mr. Floyd's neck took the weight of the officer's body and gear when he was restrained.
The cause of death is a low level of oxygen that caused the brain damage and caused the heart to stop.
When asked about fentanyl found in Mr. Floyd's blood, Dr. Tobin said Mr. Floyd did not go into a coma as a person would from a drug overdose. Police in Northern Ireland say this week's violence in Belfast is on a scale they've not seen in years. Politicians on all sides have lined up to condemn the attacks. The worst of the unrest was in the city's west, on both sides of a wall between loyalist and nationalist communities.
On an already febrile situation, now more fuel on the fire. At one of Belfast's peace lines last night, the peace was broken. In the hands of teenagers, petrol bombs thrown in both directions over the wall. Each evening, these gates are locked to keep the mainly Protestant and Catholic communities apart. Now forced open, rammed by cars and battered closed by police, amidst a running battle between crowds on each side.
It's hard to control. Mobs of kids, when they see one side doing it, they're joining in.
Who's encouraging it?
The loyalist politicians are doing it. Why? Because they got Brexit in and it's not working. It'll take months and months now to repair the damages community-wise, if it ever is repaired.
As the fighting continued between Belfast's Shankill and Springfield Road, local priests tried to warn young people of the danger, themselves in harm's way. The to and fro attacks, which lasted over an hour, have just been interrupted by the arrival of this line of police Land Rovers who pushed the crowd back from this side of the peace wall. Earlier, on the other side of the wall in the loyalist Shankill Road, a bus was hijacked and set alight.
The disorder last night was at a scale that we have not seen in recent years in Belfast or further afield. The fact that it was sectarian violence and there was large groups on both sides of the Gateshead Lanark Way, again, is something that we have not seen for a number of years.
In loyalist communities, who are staunchly British, there's a backlash over the Brexit deal, which sets Northern Ireland apart from the rest of the UK.
So whenever I got here, the police...
19-year-old Joel was himself arrested in a riot over Easter and released without charge. He tells me he was looking out for a friend. But many who have become involved are even younger. Why do you think this is happening?
I don't think young people really understand the details in terms of the Irish sea border and stuff. I think what they're being told and what they're seeing reflected in the media is that Sinn Féin are winning, the Republicans are winning, and that our identity is under attack. And when they hear those words, when they hear that stuff, and then they're told, all right, and the way that you can help is by going out there and throwing bombs, sticks and stones at people, they're more than willing to do so.
People will say, why were you there in the first place? Wouldn't it have been better to just go home?
The fact is, someone I cared about was in trouble, and I don't think that that's anything that someone can sort of blame me for or accuse me of wrongdoing.
As the clean-up operation began in Belfast, political leaders gathered for an emergency meeting at Stormont to try and bring about calm.
There can be no place in our society for violence or the threat of violence, and it must stop.
What we saw last night at Lanark Way interface, I think, was a very dangerous escalation of events of recent days, and it's utterly deplorable.
There's concern the gates have been opened on something more reminiscent of Northern Ireland's days of old, and they may be difficult to close.
Here are the top stories on ABC News. Australia has secured an extra 20 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine, but the rollout timetable remains up in the air. Federal health authorities recommended last night the Pfizer jab be given to Australians under 50 over the AstraZeneca vaccine. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says the extra doses will arrive by the end of the year, but did not put a date on when all Australians will get their first injection. A drunk and drug-affected driver who killed 4 children in a crash at Oatlands in Sydney's West has been sentenced to 28 years in prison. Samuel William Davidson lost control of his ute while excessively speeding and hit a group of children in February last year. 3 children were injured in the crash. One of them has been left with a permanent brain injury. 10 witnesses will be called to give evidence against former Melbourne school principal Malka Leifer when she faces a hearing over child sexual abuse charges later this year. The 54-year-old is facing 74 charges, including 11 counts of rape, over allegations she abused 3 sisters between 2004 and 2008. Ms. Leifer maintains her innocence. And West Australian authorities are warning residents to prepare for wild conditions as 2 weather systems merge together over the Indian Ocean. Cyclone Saroja is expected to make landfall around Carnarvon late Sunday or early Monday, while a tropical low northwest of Saroja has formed into Tropical Cyclone Odette, more than 1,000 kilometres northwest of Exmouth. Business groups are calling on the government to ease visa restrictions on international students and travellers on working holidays as labour shortages continue under Australia's closed borders. It's an issue that could worsen if the latest advice on the AstraZeneca vaccine slows Australia's rollout further, delaying the opening of Australia's border. For more on this, I'm joined by Jenny Lambert, who's the Acting Chief Executive of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Jenny Lambert, thank you so much for your time. So this change in advice on the AstraZeneca vaccine means the rollout will be delayed. We don't have an updated time frame as yet. How concerning is that for business?
It's certainly a concern that any delay in the rollout will lessen the certainty. I mean, what was good that came out of the National Cabinet decisions today was a lot more certainty, a lot more of opportunities for business and events to open up, increasing in capacity. So there was a lot of good outcomes out of today, which balance against the uncertainty still, particularly with international travel restart, that any delay in the vaccine rollout will have. I mean, there has been a range of delays, both in terms of supply, getting supply out of Europe, getting the jabs out to everyone, and obviously this latest announcement of the AstraZeneca, vaccine, will cause some concern about delays. But we've got to keep working with governments. We've got to keep creating certainty, and that's what we're trying to keep our eye on the main prize here, which is opening up as soon as its the risk is reduced to do so.
Yeah, it's not just certainty, it's confidence as well that business wants. So how important is it for your members that there's confidence in the vaccine program?
Oh, and it's very important, but I think it's just as important for the community to have confidence in the program, and it's very important for all of us, including the role of media and business and others, to help reinforce the confidence that's needed to stay in the vaccine rollout. I mean, these issues will come up as more health information arises. I mean, there will be changes to health advice, and that's a good thing. In the meantime, we have to continue to look at what is going to be the way that we can restart international travel. Good news about the New Zealand, Australia travel bubble being confirmed this week as well. We've got to look at other countries where we can create those opportunities. This can all happen while the rollout is still happening. We don't have to wait till the end of the rollout to get a lot more of certainty in those sort of opportunities.
But do you think the government will move on that? Did you take any hope from the government today flagging the removal of hotel quarantine for vaccinated travellers, albeit with conditions? It's an idea that they're talking about after National Cabinet.
Oh, we took a lot of heart. I mean, we've been saying for many months now that if the governments collectively, because it's not just the federal government, the state and territory governments have a huge role to play in the way they manage the quarantine caps, and so all the governments need to look at ways that we can assess arrivals according to risk. Not every arrival who comes in internationally comes from countries with a high risk, but yet at the moment we treat them all, except for New Zealanders, in exactly the same basket. There's a lot of opportunities for us to look at other arrivals, but including returning Australians, and a lot of returning Australians are in places that currently are relatively low risk and have been vaccinated and have been tested. So how can we need to look at those opportunities, and it was great to hear that comment from the PM today. Long overdue maybe, but either way we'll take it. We want to go forward and look at ways that they can manage that risk and get more arrivals back into the country.
You've called for visa extensions for working holidaymakers and foreign students. Weren't their visas already extended last year?
They were, and that was a good thing. I mean, so we've called for that to be even more flexible and even more extensions and expansion of that to take place. Working holidaymakers were a critical part of our labour force. I mean, we're a very big country. And we have a lot of seasonal and casual jobs that relate in tourism and agriculture that are not there all year necessarily, but certainly the working holidaymakers who were already mobile, by definition, they're moving around the country enjoying the sights of Australia. I mean, they move to these various locations and take up those jobs. With that pipeline being turned off, now that we've actually got this great domestic tourism campaign to get everyone out there and enjoy the country, we're hearing more and more stories of hotels not being able to open up all their rooms because they haven't got enough cleaners, or indeed restaurants that can't open on all the hours they'd like to because they haven't got enough staff. So we encourage Australians to get out there and take those opportunities, but for many Australians, they're staying close to home at the moment. So we've got to work out ways that we can get that labour there so we can maximise the opportunity of those businesses to regrow.
So what difference will it make? Is it mainly for tourism centres?
Tourism, agriculture, in all those areas that where they have been relying in the past on short-term seasonal workers or casual labour. No, I mean, there's a whole range of, I mean, obviously the loss of international students is a huge issue, particularly in those states. In all states, there was a strong reliance as an export industry on international students. It created a vibe and an economy in the cities because most of the international students were located in capital cities. So there's a whole range of issues that relate. Once that pipeline is turned off, no more international students, or very few, except for those that are in country. So we need to maximise the use of those. No more working holidaymakers at the moment, so we need to maximise those that are in country. And then we need to look at ways that we can start bringing these cohorts back into the country.
Jenny Lambert, good to get your thoughts. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks very much.
The federal government is urging older Australians to still come forward to get the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine after new health advice was issued for younger age groups. Ian Yates is Chief Executive of the Council on the Ageing. He says the vaccine rollout is going slower than he'd like, and authorities need to reassess their plans given the new advice on the AstraZeneca shot.
I think we're going to get there for residents. There continue to be hiccups, which is disappointing, but we should be patient. We're also, like everybody, concerned that the government needs to have a clearer strategy, and they are working on it with regard to staff. Of course, the latest changes to do with AstraZeneca are complicating that because there are clearly staff who are below the age of 50. but there are many who are not. If you're in a Commonwealth subsidised aged care facility, the Commonwealth has accepted responsibility for vaccination, and they have their in-reach teams doing that. And in some areas, there's been very high levels of vaccination. In others, it's been falling behind a bit, but the Commonwealth is certainly going to do that. But there has been some publicity today, for example, about people with significant dementia who live in a retirement village. The Commonwealth has no connection to retirement villages. They're governed by state legislation and arrangements, and people are living in a retirement village like they live in the community. I think there's an issue that we need to look at in terms of how families can be helped when you have people either living in a retirement village where you might have more of them, or in the community receiving home care, and the majority of people who receive aged care in our community receive it at home. And they've got significant frailty, mobility issues, or dementia. And particularly if they have dementia, then taking them out to try and go to some kind of clinic is a challenge. And I think, governments and I know that there are retirement village operators, good ones, who are concerned about this and would be happy to work with, say, their state governments to work out a strategy for making that as seamless and as less problematic.
New data shows Northern Territory gamblers lost unprecedented amounts of money on poker machines last year. Anti-gambling advocates say it's the most disadvantaged in the community who've been hit the hardest.
As the coronavirus crisis escalated last year, the Territory's pubs, clubs and casinos were forced to close, taking all poker machines offline.
And the immediate impact obviously was that user losses went down completely, down to zero, because nothing was open.
But 10 weeks later, when punters were allowed back on the pokies, they pumped record amounts of money into the machines. In the month of July, $296 million was wagered on Territory pokies, causing gamblers to lose $25 million, a 52% increase compared with the same month a year earlier.
I was pretty shocked because, your general increase, it's around CPI, so you're looking at 3 to 5% per year.
The NT has the highest rate of problem gambling in the country, with Indigenous, unemployed and male gamblers most at risk.
Again,
gambling researcher Dr. Matt Stevens attributes last year's pokies splurge to federal pandemic payments.
So I would call it probably the job seeker effect.
While the monthly pokies losses shot up after the shutdown, they've steadily declined since their peak in July, although they're still higher than before the pandemic.
These figures represent human tragedies of more crime, more marriage breakup, greater financial difficulty and domestic violence.
Hospitality NT, which represents pubs and clubs, says it became aware of the surge in pokie spending last year and expanded measures to deal with problem gambling.
We've now made available our multi-venue self-exclusion tool online for all pubs, clubs and casinos across the Territory, regardless of whether they're members of ours or not.
The NT government generates almost $30 million a year from poker machine taxes, plus another $9 million from a community benefit levy. It says the levy funds ongoing support programs and research about problem gambling. Jono Gibson, ABC News.
A new research program at the Queensland University of Technology will examine whether it is possible to change the way domestic violence perpetrators think and react. The study will explore how psychologically and physically abusive men perceive the world and then determine what causes violent reactions. For more, I'm joined by researcher and counselling psychologist Dave Misso. Dave Misso, thank you so much for your time. Tell us a little bit more about this study and what it aims to find out.
Well, the project really came from some research we did a couple of years ago, which found that men who had a tendency to be psychologically violent had low capacity to understand that somebody else's thoughts may be quite independent from themselves, and that they felt that they were the centre of the universe. And we've looked at research over the years of programs that are run by men for men, and found that a lot of the outcomes are inconsistent, or some men improve while others don't improve. And so we wanted to gathered a lot of evidence to develop this particular program.
Yeah, and so why is it that existing domestic violence programs, as you were just saying, then produce inconsistent results?
I think a lot of the earlier programs were really trying to teach men about the impact of violence, what constituted violence, and I think inadvertently they probably invited more shame and blame, and I think a lot of justification and minimising, and so men are feeling kind of struggling with what's going on, and so we wanted to look at doing something that was really focusing on allowing men to start to analyse and, I guess, become more aware of what their own internal experiences were, what led them to be able to think a certain way. And most men would say, I think, they want to be good men, want to be good fathers, good husbands, and what diminishes that capacity in moments where their physiology may increase, they have difficulty regulating their emotions, and to try and help them to develop skills in order to enhance that capacity for self-reflection so they can understand what may be happening for somebody else.
Does the approach to treatment differ between perpetrators who are physically violent and those who might be psychologically abusive?
Yes and no. I think what we're looking at is, and this is part of the research, is to understand in greater detail what drives some men to act in certain ways and not in others. And we're also interested in how that some men can be violent in a lot of situations or in certain situations, and then in another moment may not be violent. And what is it that happens for men in that moment that they choose not to be violent? And the research is really trying to tap into that. And so that we can, I guess this becomes a standalone program, but also helps to inform other programs operating for men.
You've worked with perpetrators for 30 years as a counselling psychologist. Can they change?
They can, and I have seen a lot of changes. And where men, this is where we're using as a group program. So when men come together, supporting one another in things that deep down they all, want the same. And we find that men being able to support one another in this work is quite profound.
Women can also be perpetrators of domestic violence. Are they included in this study?
The women that we, not in this particular study, not as a core therapy group, we acknowledge that there are also women perpetrators of domestic violence, but we acknowledge that the overwhelming majority of fatalities and physical injuries are suffered by women. The program actually will incorporate the men's female partners, and so they won't be part of the therapy group itself, but we will be consulting with their partners as the program progresses to gauge their experience of the men as they progress through the group. And that information then will be fed back into the program as we progress.
Okay, Dave Misso, make sure you keep us updated on the progress of your study. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Karina, very much.
Carbon farming is touted as a way to reduce